Hey everybody, good morning. Thanks for getting up early and being here with us. Before we move into the discussion phase, I just want to kind of set things up a little bit. So obviously one of the major challenges that's facing art dealers right now is this question of how do we connect with new buyers and who are those new buyers? And I would argue that the most important demographic that they could possibly try to access is young people, which means now millennials and soon after them Generation Z. So what are we talking about when we talk about millennials? The definitions shift a little bit, but in general, it's people who were born between about 1980 and 1996. And that means that this year, they will all be somewhere between about 24 and 40 years old. Another important thing to think about here is that millennials are the last generation where, some of them at least, grew up without the internet saturating every single aspect of our daily lives. Generation Z, when they come up, they won't have known any other type of world besides the one that we now live in. One important thing about these two groups is that over the course of the next 10 years, economists estimate that they are going to receive a good chunk of somewhere between $15 and $68 trillion in assets that are going to be passed down by the baby boomers. Baby boomers, for reference, people who were born between 1946, right after World War II, and 1964, which means that they will be between 56 and 74 years old this year. And some of those assets they're going to be handing down are artworks, but a lot of them are not, and those other assets can certainly be used to buy a lot more artworks. Now, the important point here is that we shouldn't assume that millennials and Gen Z are going to automatically become collectors just because their parents were or their grandparents were. And this is especially important to think about because millennials and Gen Z have become increasingly vocal about how sharply they disagree with older generations, specifically the baby boomers, on a whole variety of different ways that they have chosen to live their lives. And nothing embodies this better than the phrase, "okay, boomer." Do we have the slide? Okay. So I'll just launch into this. Okay Boomer, as some of you probably know, is an online meme that has basically taken over the world over the course of the past 6 months or so. And it's basically a comeback that younger generations, specifically millennials and Gen Z, have had towards baby boomers who have taken up this trend of just launching into these tirades about the way that young people live their lives and how it's all wrong. Okay Boomer is a response to any kind of these criticisms, and it's not just a way of saying your criticism doesn't apply to the world I live in. It's a way of saying that your criticism doesn't apply to the world that I live in, specifically because your generation screwed things up so badly for us. So if you want to criticize millennials for, say, like not having better jobs or bigger bank accounts, they'll say okay Boomer back to you, and it will mean we don't have those things because boomers blew up the economy in 2008 when we were trying to enter the workforce, and now we're behind for a generation. If you want to criticize a millennial for, say, extending a business trip because they want to take a low emissions train instead of flying somewhere, they'll hit you with an okay Boomer, and that means I want to do these things because your willingness to take planes and burn fossil fuels at every conceivable opportunity is now subjecting millions of people around the world to catastrophic climate change. And by the way, the boomer legislators don't even want to acknowledge it, let alone try to change it. We're giving you all this background because I think that we've now reached the okay boomer moment in the art market. The reality is that many young people are as turned off by boomer implemented and boomer sustained policies about the way that art is supposed to be bought and sold as they are about boomer implemented and boomer sustained policies about everything from the economy to the environment to politics and much more. In short, this is not going to be a problem that we're going to fix by just galleries going out and starting Instagram accounts. Instead, it demands we have to take a hard look at every single way that we have thought about how the business works. We have to ask ourselves whether these things are doing more to bring young people in today or keep them out forever. And that is what we are going to investigate today with these 4 brilliant panelists and millennials who happen to be over here to my left. So I'll do the more formal introductions. Alexander Forbes, immediately to my left, is the Director of Corporate Development and Market Intelligence at Artsy, where he works across the organization to advise on company strategy, develop key internal initiatives, and grow the company through partnerships and acquisitions. Previously, he was the executive editor of Artsy Editorial and earlier the European market editor for Artnet News in Berlin and bureau chief for Louise Bluin Media in German-speaking Europe. To Alex's left is Joe Kennedy. Joe is an entrepreneur and co-founder of the Gallery Unit London, which uses new technologies and pioneering approaches to digital media to expand the audience for contemporary art. He's a young patron of Tate, the V&A Museum, and the Royal Academy. He also sits on the Serpentine's Future Contemporaries Committee and was recently named co-chair of MTV's Redefine program, as well as one of Forbes' 30 under 30 entrepreneurs. Claudia Schachenmann, to Joe's left, is an art strategy consultant and the founder of BureauxSchachenmann, a Zurich-based agency that advises on real estate-related art spaces, physical and virtual art hubs, and much more. She previously worked as a key part of Art Basel's new initiatives and VIP team, where she launched the fair's Global Patrons Council and Next program for young and emerging collectors in Basel, Miami Beach, and Hong Kong. And last, but certainly not least, Kamiar Maleki is the director of the Volta and Pulse art fairs. From 2016 to 2018, he served as director of the Contemporary Istanbul Fair. With over 15 years as a collector, curator, and patron of contemporary art, he has fostered numerous young artists' careers. He is also the co-founder of the Aga Khan Museum UK Patrons Chapter and the founder of ICA Young Patrons for the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. Okay, now we know what we're dealing with. I'm going to turn it over to these guys, and I want to start on this point. So when I started working in the gallery world back in 2005, I was a front desk assistant. And one of the first official things that my boss told me was that my job was to, and I quote, intake maximum information and give out minimum information. And obviously this is a textbook example of the way that the gallery world is supposed to run on exclusivity and elitism, and that's how you create value in artworks and make people want to buy things. How does this go over with a millennial audience? Joe, I'm going to start with you because I feel like you feel particularly strongly about this.
Thanks, and an amazing introduction. Thank you very much. I think how we approach that scenario is basically doing the opposite. And we started our gallery 6 years ago, probably unwittingly knowing that transparency was going to be a really important thing. And I guess we started our gallery when we were 22. We come from this kind of new generation, I think. And we know that if somebody comes into our gallery and is taking time out of their day to walk in, we have to offer them value back. And so to assume that people walking in should just be left alone, shouldn't be engaged with, shouldn't be treated with kind of a level of courtesy and engagement, we think that's just not the way to engage new people. This is a generation, obviously, which is now the largest ever consumer generation that's ever existed on the planet. It's also the most racially diverse, ethnically diverse, the most engaged generation. They have more access to information and art than ever before. And obviously the power of this generation is huge, and it can have a huge transformative effect on the perception of the art world and the perception of the culture around contemporary art in the future. But I think they also have grown up being told that they can have whatever they want whenever they want, which is an interesting fact. The OK Boomer meme is a great example of that. You know, it's there are all these comments about this generation being entitled and lazy and self-obsessed, and that's all fueled by social media and the selfie culture and the meme culture. But actually, if you look at how society has structured itself around this generation, they're being told that whatever they want, they can have. They can watch movies on demand, they can order food and it's there within 5 minutes. Brands and companies are constantly optimizing their products based on the behaviors and preferences of that generation specifically. So it's almost like we've created a monster in a way with this generation. They are entitled for good reason. But as gallerists and as art professionals and custodians of culture, I think we need to understand how we get these people involved in our industry. And the way of doing that isn't by not engaging them. It's by offering them value. And that value can be as simple as when they walk into the space, giving them a smile, being out of the way with how much you go and engage them and educate them. If you walk into any big retail store, or if you walk into pretty much anywhere on the high street, you'll never encounter a situation where there's two people sitting behind a desk in armchairs who don't get up when you walk in. And I think it's almost as simple as that. I mean, we've always practiced this, get up off your seat if somebody walks in and say hello. Walk around the space with them if they want to. Give them an education and understanding. These people are distrusting of big corporations. They've gone through the global financial crash. They've gone through data scandals with Facebook, the Trump impeachment inquiry that's happening at the moment. All these things that they've existed through have kind of generated this real corporate distrust. And as a result, people are buying more independent brands. People are looking for alternatives to corporations. And if they do buy from organizations, and if they do engage with organizations, they want to do so with organizations that look after their staff, that support unrepresented artists, that behave ethically, and that are transparent and open with their pricing, the way they go about marketing their products and their services. And to give back to people when they come in, to offer them value, means that they will engage with you. And engagement is the most important thing for this audience, I think. If somebody walks in and they're not necessarily a buyer, if I walk into a gallery, most galleries will just ignore me because I don't fit the profile of a typical collector. I'm young, I don't dress maybe like a collector, but I might have 1 million followers on my social networks, and 100,000 of those people might be very engaged in art. 100 of those people might be collectors. So if I leave with a bad experience, it's not only that I haven't purchased something there and then, but the gallery has missed the opportunity to build credibility amongst my network, which can obviously have a huge future impact on sales and revenue for the gallery, which is almost unquantifiable these days. I know you can probably quantify it. But that exchange of value, I think, is really important, and I think it'd be great to discuss today, I think, what that value is that galleries, auction houses, fairs can give to this generation so that they feel part of the conversation.
Well, that creates a natural segue. Alex, do you want to talk about some of the things that you've found out through studying the collecting population? Like, do these articles of faith that we've lived with about building value through exclusivity, do they actually show up when you survey people at Artsy?
They do. So we surveyed our collectors over the summer, and I think one of the important things to acknowledge is that also the exclusivity that has been built up does work on some level for the Gen X and Boomer collectors. It is something that is motivating. But when you switch and look towards Millennials and Gen Z folks, it falls apart really quickly. We find that people really expect to have all the information that they would need to make a purchasing decision available before they ask any questions. So that could be information about the artist. It's particularly prices. I think it's a common practice in the art world today not to list prices publicly online, but we find that artworks that are uploaded with their prices public are between 2 and 6 times more likely to sell. And that's particularly the case for artists who have less inherent demand. Mm-hmm. So information asymmetries like that tend to hit, artists that aren't your Kusamas and Warhols, where somebody already knows the name brand and is looking after them. So particularly if you have a kind of newer program, that can be a way to reach younger collectors that you wouldn't otherwise. I also think that the internet offers a really interesting opportunity. It's amazing if you can walk into a gallery and have that interaction with the dealer and get the story about the artist. It's amazing if you're a really established collector in the art world and you have that key that unlocks all of the great information about artists and their stories. For most people, that isn't the case. But the internet allows you to scale up that storytelling, so you can kind of have the same level of introduction to an artist's career that you would if you were a MoMA trustee and had $100 million in a duffel bag walk into a gallery. If you do that once and put it out there, we still do hear from people that they want to hold back that information to initiate a conversation. But when we talk to the collectors who we surveyed in greater depth, they said that more frequently than not, they just won't inquire if the information isn't there already. They'll move on to something else. There's so much great art out there. And so I think it is a really important thing.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the people who are seeing that there's not a price listed and going away are not just saying, "Oh, it's not just that I don't know the price. It's that the fact that they're not showing me the price tells me something deeper about the way that I'm going to be treated if I go to that organization."
Absolutely. We hear that it just means, oh, is there something shady going on here? Am I going to get a different price than somebody else that asked? Does that mean that there's going to be some value judgment against me if I ask for a price and I can't afford it? Will this gallery ever care about me again? So it just sets the wrong tone. And it's such an easy thing to fix. I think there's this notion that it devalues the art, but I think and ultimately, if the gallerist wants to make sales, grow the artist's career, offer more opportunities for them to keep the lights on, keep building more ambitious projects, it's a really easy thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. Claudia, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to start the next program at Basel? Like, I imagine that since you were spearheading this, I imagine the organization just wasn't thinking about it as deeply as you were, and you were really somebody who was passionate about saying, like, no, this is a generation that we have to pay attention to, and they may want to do things very differently than what you expect.
Okay, so first of all, I'm not a spokesperson for Art Basel, but of course I made this experience, and it's about approximately 7 years ago, which is quite a long time. So Art Basel at that time was already thinking like how to approach new collectors as well as existing collectors. So we had these two basic initiatives, which was the Global Patrons Council, you might know, so the mega collectors of this world, and at the same time also the next tours, which were the emerging collectors. And we were basically this department which it was kind of an appendix to our Basel, basically a task force to provide the galleries with new collectors, which is, I think, it's the responsibility of an art fair to bring good collectors to the fair eventually. And so we did a lot of research, and also we started to create these focus groups where I also met Kamiar, because at that time he was an emerging collector. And then we started this Art Basel tours at all in Hong Kong, in Miami, and Basel. And it was quite interesting to see how actually not motivated the galleries were to participate. It was really, the response was slow. It was like, okay, come on, guys, do we really have to explain to you that there is a new generation? They want to come into the art market. They're interested. They're young corporate people they're affluent. They're having money. You can't just focus on the 1 or 2% on the top. There is like this 99% behind who are actually very interested. And I think what I also observed is that, and also in my environment, these people are mostly they're entrepreneurs themselves, so they will always know that it's kind of attention is a currency for them. They, as you said, they spend their time. They want to come into the gallery and find some works, for example, but also they want to have a very a social moment. They want to engage with other people. They want to be entertained, if I may say that like that. But it's really about not only buying art, or it's more about experience art and the whole social scene around, to get to know new people, to make it a happening. And I think art is a really event-driven business, so we can make much more of that part. And I think that was a key finding, I think. And also, as I said, the not being ready for that audience from the gallery side. Yeah.
And speaking of the event side of the business, Cam, can you talk about it a little bit from the art fair director's perspective? Because obviously you're dealing with dozens of galleries, and I'm sure that there are very few of them who are as willing to say, like, yes, I'm ready to embrace new people and do things differently. Not everybody's going to be Joe about this kind of thing. So can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, it's also a unique position that I'm in because I come from the collector side. So I'm previously being a young collector myself, when this whole thing started, so we look at it from a very different standpoint. And I use actually Claudia's young initiative for Basel patrons as an example of, this whole boomer generation. It feels about It's about accessibility. It's about inclusiveness. It's about being part of it. Some of the biggest fears that young collectors have these days of going into a fair, like someone, a famous singer or rapper or an AI guy or an app guy, will walk in, maybe just like, as you said, in jogging pants and shirts, and, serious galleries won't take them seriously, even though they have the money, they have the knowledge, because knowledge is a key part of something that I try to put out there, educate without patronizing, trying to include community spirit. This is what we try to do. Also in Miami this year for Pulse, we were very engaging on a local basis. We were looking at young corporations. We did lunches for Twitter, and they had 35 people attend lunches at our fairs, and the CEO of Twitter ended up buying something. And we did things for the Burger King Foundation, just engaging people and making them feel welcome. Because the whole thing is like, if you're a young collector, our biggest thing was, and one of the reasons why I joined Claudia's initiative is that they don't take you that seriously. Your parents might be big collectors, but you also want to be a collector, and you want to have the same kind of respect that, the galleries give your elders, and you don't get that. So, but also this day and age, you have so much choice. There's so many galleries out there. There's so many art fairs out there. So you have to be different. You have to create personalized programs. You have to make everybody feel special and welcome.
Out of curiosity, when you were laying out the plan for what you wanted to do, and did you get any pushback from the galleries and you were like, hey, we're going to have this lunch for the Burger King Foundation?
Yeah, because, first of all, they might not take it seriously.
Well, right, yeah.
And, Burger King Foundation actually has a very huge, when I first started, I was also a bit skeptical myself, but as a fair, you try to associate yourselves with brands, with people. There are different brands that constantly approach me now saying they want to get into the art world because they realize that there's a huge network that you can be made in the art world. But likewise, also for us, we have to look outside now. We have to look at the fashion world. Look at what Alex Israel is doing with Remova. Look at what everybody is working on these days, and you see how all of these different worlds are interlinking. Why has Untitled and Fox started in San Francisco? It's not by coincidence that they're all there now. It's because they see that the young money is in those kind of places. So you have to adapt, you have to change. And the problem with the art market is that it's maybe more of an older beast that is used to the top 5% of collectors. They're used to the ways they've been dealing in the past. And embracing change is challenging, but something that is necessary to adapt and to win. Otherwise, there are many fairs that don't make it.
Right. Yeah, I always, one of my, this is getting a little bit into the talk that I'll do later today, but one of my all-time favorite quotes from the world of professional sports is there was a coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL, and he said that if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. So this idea of education is obviously something that has come up now already in the conversation so far. And the old school way of looking at this is that the dealer says, okay, if I'm dealing with new collectors, it's my job to educate them about what's good, what taste is, what they should be paying attention to, all those kinds of things. Now, when that started, the information environment was drastically different than what it is now. Yeah. Now we're just saturated in info and choices and all these kinds of things. How do you think that changes the relationship between a new collector who's coming in and a dealer who's trying to figure out a way to engage them?
Yeah, I think it's one of the big misconceptions of this generation is that they don't know what they're talking about and that they're not informed. These people know their stuff more so than you would believe. They have access to limitless information. Most of these young collectors coming into galleries or fairs, they've done their research before they get in. So as a dealer, gallerist, whatever, you have to be sensitive to that. You no longer have the privilege of being able to say whatever you like. And this idea of transparency, again, comes back into it. You're dealing with people who have done their research and who understand what's out there. They might have been following the artist that you're showing online on Instagram. They might know what's in the studio from a studio photo they've posted. So no longer can you say the works aren't ready yet, they haven't been finished, because they go, well, I saw it yesterday on her Instagram. So it's changing the landscape a lot, and you're dealing with informed collectors who are empowered, who have information and knowledge, and so that has to be met, I think, with a kind of propensity to and a resolve to educate these people further and give them the experiences that they want. I think the experience, I know everyone talks about the experience economy and it's becoming a bit stale, but collectors now and the younger generations want to have an experience because it's a reflection of their identity and personality. They can do their research, they understand their stuff, but then they want to be able to activate that in an experience, whether it's in a gallery or at a fair, so that they can share it with their audience. And the works that they want to buy now actually need to reflect their kind of belief systems and values. But the fact that they can do their own research means that they can delve into a company's history, they can delve into the backgrounds of artists, they understand them implicitly, and I think none of them want to participate in the previous world, you know, of a small group of collectors, a small group of galleries. They want to use their information and knowledge to diversify the things that they're looking at and the things that they're buying. So yeah, as dealers, as gallerists, I think we just have to be sensitive to that and understand who you're dealing with. And I think kind of just basically throw away that misconception about this generation that they don't know what they're talking about and that we know more than they do, because it's just not true anymore.
And also the education is also part of a relationship. You know, you're trying to, again, with the millennials, they want to have that relationship with the gallery. You know, they want to be friends, they want to be associated, they want to go to the events. You know, and in this day and age, with technology, they could just go to the artist directly. You know, they might even, you know, the loyalties, I was talking to galleries yesterday, like the loyalties sometimes are not there anymore with the artists. So if you can approach an artist directly, if the gallery snobs you, then they'll approach the artist directly. So it's about trust. It's about building relationships. It's about you know, transparency in a way that, I mean, it's frowned upon still, and there's many applications, even with Artsy, even with, you know, other apps like Magnus and things like that, that have tried to open up the art world to information, but they're still getting pushed back. But I think maybe now is the time where galleries should embrace that. But again, because it's still an unregulated market, you know, there will be a little, you know, fight for it. But it's about giving trust back to the clients and the collectors and the people. That's what's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the galleries still serve such an important role in creating signal through the vast amount of art that we have exposure to now. You know, we have over 1 million artworks on the platform. It can be really overwhelming. Even if you go to an art fair and you have 200-300 galleries in that space, you need to find ways to like get into a group of artists that you really love, and fostering those careers, creating that signal is a huge part of why we've always, you know, it's been so important for us to partner with the industry. On the other hand, I think millennial collectors have a little bit less tolerance, as you said, for some of those other business practices that go along with that. You know, they're probably not going to, because they're not just interacting with a few galleries in their local community. They might be more skeptical of the idea that you have to buy a few artists that you are less excited about to get access to the artists that you're really excited about. They're probably going to then just go to the secondary market and find it on there. And so I don't exactly have the answer of how we solve that, because I think that practice has a real application in the primary market of helping galleries keep the lights on, helping support more artists, and that's something that we believe strongly in. But finding ways to open up some of those practices, I think, will be important to keep the industry moving forward.
I think it's also important to look at other industries. For example, the sports shoes, like Nike. As a customer of Nike, I can create my own shoes, and that's basically what we want. And we want also the galleries basically to to look at our needs and figure out a way how to sell to us, and not being like patronizing us and tell us how to buy, but listen to like how we want to buy and what we want to buy. Also, I think the portfolio of galleries sometimes is so high up, like millennials, or like, let's say a emerging collector, he possibly cannot afford an art piece that is like 20,000. He might want to buy something for 5,000. And if I go to a gallery and I only find works for 20,000 upwards that I can afford, so why am I going there? So what's my program that I get to see at the gallery? So it's also, I think, important to have some segments, I think, in a gallery, so everybody has a way of entry and not just, okay, this is the most expensive work, and if you want to buy, you can buy it. If not, sorry, you're out. And I think that's it's a whole conversation between the customer and the galleries, and I think that's, as we said, this is key at the moment to open the doors for new collectors.
I think this is a really good point. Other industries that we're all exposed to now, the way they operate is so starkly different to the way that this industry operates still. Yeah. I think there's a level of expectancy that's created when you do have access to so much information. That's your base, that's your modus operandi, right? And that's what you expect. And then you walk into a gallery and suddenly, how much is this? Let me take your email. Right. You know, you don't get the answers that you're used to getting. And so so there's a really stark difference there, which really turns these guys off, especially this generation.
Well, and it's kind of table stakes too, as you said in the intro. I can't think of an industry that isn't customer centric that's growing right now, and most of them that aren't are declining rapidly. And I don't think that we want art to be in the latter group. You know, that wouldn't be good for culture, wouldn't be good for artists. Yeah, so 100%. It is hugely important.
And I think also that point of offering people, you know, if you're running a gallery and you do want to connect with this audience, and let's say they can't spend 50K on a painting, offer them a book, you know, a catalogue, a print. There's lots of different things that you can offer to collectors so that they have a great experience and they get on the ladder with you. I think you're missing a huge trick if you know, the 50 people that walk into your gallery on a day-to-day basis, you just leave without being spoken to, I think. I mean, maybe it's because we started our business completely from the outside of the industry, and we knew the value of how important every single person was. I think we need to go back to that place where you place value in everybody, not just whether they're, you know, if they can afford to spend 100 grand with you, but whether they can spend 50 pounds with you. Because in 10 years' time, they might be that person that spends 100 grand with you. I think it's a really good point, an important consideration, you know. Build products and services that can cater to different levels.
Yeah, and I think that's important too in the broader economic picture that we're talking about for these generations. To go back to the whole blow up of the economy in 2008 and all that kind of stuff. What we see if we look at all the data about who's making money, we see that the whole middle class is kind of being hollowed out right now. All the money is kind of going to the polls. You have the top 1%, 0.1% sucking in all this money that used to go to family doctors, dentists, people who were young professionals, upwardly mobile, but not able to walk into a gallery and spend $250,000 on an artwork. So the entry point that collectors used to have just isn't there so much anymore, at least in the specific price ranges that it used to be. So yeah, having these lower priced things that allows you to start a relationship ends up being an important aspect, I think, right? Like, and that's really what it's about. It's not about saying like, oh, we're going to cheapen ourselves by just offering books for $20 or something like that. It's like, no, this is how you start a relationship with people. It's how you start to engage them. And then you can build from there as you build trust with them. So it's not just a matter of like,
but I would like to make another example. For example, I lived in Hong Kong, and there I was pretty much facing a very popular approach of dealing with arts. I mean, I'm sure you all know K11. It's basically a mall that offers a lot of art experiences. It starts with design, with fashion. It's all mixed. I find this very interesting to approach people also, and a lot of millennials and even Gen Z people totally engaged with that way of experiencing art, as well as Team Lab. You know, people might not want to buy art because we are also a little bit in the age of less. You know, they want to experience art. They're happy to have their instant gratification by going to a Team Lab experience for $20, and that's how they experience art. And I think that's just also, I mean, we should more think about the future than the glorious past and how the things were. but actually reinvent them. And what I see is that there is a very linear innovation in the art world. It's never radical like we had with Uber or anything. It's super slow. It's like, okay, now we go this, now we take our gallery online, great. So that's nothing new. That's just digitalization and very normal. And we're actually facing another industrial revolution, which is more about like bringing the body together with tech. So where is the gallery world within that? I mean, I'm going beyond that a little bit, but that's actually the future we face.
And also, I'm talking now just pretty from a fair perspective. You know, our fair business has almost become a cultural tourism business. So it's not just about the fair. The fair is the access point of what we want to achieve. But in order to get the people around, we try to engage with the city, try to offer experiences to the collector that they don't do. Like, I know we see our colleagues from Brussels here, they do a good job there as well. You know, in Istanbul, we, hosted parties in collectors' homes and just try to give experiences to people that they don't see. And then they can actually see what a collector lives with, what they act with, how they, young Serpentines, they're doing a night where, it's a mystery night where 10 collectors are hosting a dinner. You buy a ticket for it, and then you go, and on the night you don't know where you're going, and then you're going to end up in a different home. So it's just about engaging with different collectors, trying to network together without it making pure business network connections. Yeah, it's about cultural tourism and engaging and making people feel, as Joe said in the beginning, making them feel special. I've seen many times in galleries when, people in hoodies and tracksuits, they walk by and they're like, don't talk to them. I'm like, come on, guys. I've seen many times in my fairs where there are collectors looking at a painting for more than 2 minutes and not one gallerist has gone and talked to them. It's about really making people feel special and engaging. Art is out there, yes, but you want to engage more people and bring them in.
It's about kind of the gallerist stepping in and also changing some of the myths that artists have been told over the time. If you make an affordable print, it'll devalue your market, it'll destabilize kind of where you're at. And instead saying, actually, it'll bring in all these new people. I think artists fundamentally want to have their work be seen. And if you look at some of the major galleries that have started editions programs and had artists become really excited about the number of young people, particularly, who now get to live with their work, I think it's an important model that more galleries can come and kind of educate their artists on and break down some of the things that we've been told.
Yeah, and that takes us back to something that just came up a few minutes ago through the lens of K11, which is this whole idea of what we've been taught about the art market for all these years is that art is special. It has to stay separate from all these other channels of the way that we live our lives. It shouldn't intersect with fashion. It shouldn't intersect with brands. It shouldn't do any of those things, because if it does, it suddenly becomes toxic and it devalues the artwork. Like, there are examples of very prominent artists who, for instance, Ryan McGinley. Ryan McGinley is one of the most in-demand commercial photographers in the world. But his gallery doesn't talk about it because they don't want that out there because they're afraid it will make people look at the artwork differently. So let's talk about this idea. Does this still hold, or are we just miles away from that, and it's just a matter of people who have been in it for longer and have that prejudice aren't recognizing that there is all this value that's out there, specifically by mixing in all these different elements of culture? Joe, when you talked before the panel, you were kind of talking about the remix culture aspect of the way that this generation works.
Yeah, I think, definitely it's a remix culture. I think it just, if you hold a mirror up to our society right now, it's no longer, siloed industries and distinct lines between different disciplines. I think everything is now melded together. Everything is integrated. The way that we live our lives, if you scroll, I don't want to keep talking about Instagram, but if you scroll through Instagram on a daily basis, you might see a family photo, then you'll see a meal from your favorite restaurant, and then you'll see a piece of art, and then you'll see something in a museum, and then something sports, entertainment. It all comes together as part of one holistic cultural experience now. And I think the value of this for us is that it offers a very clear way of us engaging a new audience, an audience who are probably feeling initially unwelcome into the industry because they're not being spoken to in the right language. these initiatives like K11, which is an amazing model, I think, for the future, of bringing together design, commerce, luxury, workshops, talks, cultural programming, alongside basically a museum quality exhibition space, is super interesting. And I mean, it's how you've got these incredible artists permeating culture like they never did before. If you keep artists boxed into the contemporary art industry, you're only speaking to a very small number of people, really. And there's traditionally been people who can afford to collect those works over time. If you collaborate with something which is more, let's say, mainstream, you get access to an entirely different audience. And that can be hugely powerful for us. Whether it devalues the art, the cultural product of the art, I think for too long we've been talking about the narrative around our industry has been money. For the last decade at least, it's just been dominated by this idea of cash, money, soaring auction prices, 450 million here, 100 million here. And that's kind of had an effect on this generation. You know, they walk into a gallery and expect to have a conversation about money a lot of the time. And I think what I would love to see is in the future, in the next 10 years, having this generation come through, if we welcome them into our industry properly, we can start seeing artists and the narrative around artists become more about social change and more about culture and how it's moving forward. So I think, you know, the likes of Daniel Arsham collaborating with Dior recently for the fashion show was a great example of an artist actually hitting a cultural zeitgeist right now. Virgil Abloh is an incredible designer who's collaborated with different artists, and Gagosian, Murakami. But interestingly, also he's just done a collaboration with IKEA on the other end of the spectrum. But you know, these artists and creatives, they're actually getting the opportunity to have their voice in the broad market. And I think the more we can get artists out there into broad culture, the better things are going to be for society at large. And so I think it's a good thing personally. I think it's going to accelerate as things like K11 having physical proximity between art and branding and design. That physical proximity is only going to breed more integration. And I think it will accelerate in the future. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and it also, when people give me that trope, like, oh, we can't devalue the work by doing these other like branded collaborations or products or whatever else, it really gives a lie to the fact that they're just not paying attention. Because I could log onto the Gagosian shop right now, and last time I checked, I could buy a Jean-Michel Basquiat skateboard. I could buy Jean Nouvel sneakers. If this is one of the paragons of how we are supposed to think about contemporary art and how to sell contemporary art, and Gagosian is doing that kind of stuff, then it seems patently ridiculous for somebody who's at a lower level to be like, oh, I need to be taken seriously. I can't be doing that branding stuff.
It comes back to kind of the myth-making around the art collector again, right? You know, I think that it is the traditional brand of an art collector, of somebody who would go to the opera and listen to classical music and all these things that are still wonderful parts of culture. But now instead of kind of a Mozart mass, we have a Kanye West gospel album. And, you know, I think that things have just broken down in a way where it's interesting as a millennial to have eclectic taste that mixes from different parts of the kind of hierarchy of traditional culture. And we see that now coming into the art market. And I think it opens up a lot more opportunity than it does close down.
But also, in addition to the brand collaboration, I think it could be also very interesting to do a collaboration with corporates like the CERN and so on. So artists have really an impact on science also, and because their creative process is very interesting, I think, for research or anything. And I mean, every artist has his own way of researching or whatever. I mean, how he gets to his end product. But I think it's not only interesting to look at the artwork that comes out of the process, but the whole process could be included into corporates and stuff. The creativity for the future, I think, is key, especially with the automation. We kind of can make use of that, and also as a gallery help the artists to start such collaborations.
Right, and automation is an interesting thing because of the fact that obviously it involves technology and saying like we're not gonna do this stuff by hand anymore. There are machines who can help us do things more efficiently and in a kind of lower touch way. And I think that tends to get portrayed as like, oh my God, it's gonna make the gallery so soulless. isn't that exactly the wrong way to think about it? Isn't it like, oh, if I don't have to spend as much time like sending individual emails to collectors or running through my database and making sure everything is okay, doesn't that mean that like I can spend more time thinking about programming? I can spend more time thinking about the artists. I can spend more time thinking about the things that like we actually got into this business to do.
1,000% yes. I mean, I think that like everybody's heard the story of the grandfather that tells them they had to walk uphill both ways to school in the freezing rain, and that's what made them, have discipline and learn. But it was probably more about the quality of the teachers when they got to school. I think that there's like a lot of, thinking if technology enters the industry, it's going to tear apart everything that we hold dear. And we tend to have a little bit of an all or nothing culture when it comes to these things. Technology should ultimately empower the gallerist, the artist, everyone in the art market to spend more time, what I think most of us got into this industry to do in the first place, which is engage with art, work with artists, work on shows, all the really important juicy stuff of why you do this and don't go into finance.
Engage with the customers.
Engage with the customers, develop new relationships, and like who wants to sit and put data into a spreadsheet or send out a bunch of emails. It can be a lot easier than that.
For sure. And I think like there's certain things that you can automate and optimize. I think it's just picking the right things, because the relationships are still so important. Like we send out hundreds of emails a day and not one of them is automated. That's really important for us. There might be, if you sign up to our mailing list, you might get an automated response welcoming you to the community, but I make sure all of our staff are always hand typing their emails, just because that aspect of the business is so important. It needs to be, if you're trying to build a personal relationship, I feel like that aspect has to be personalized. But then there's other parts of data which is so important, and we all have access to so much data now, whether it's through social media platforms, whether it's through the website and analytics. And I think you'd be foolish not to use that to your advantage. Understand the behaviors of your audience, understand what people are doing, how they're behaving, and then marketing based on those preferences and those insights. I think it's super important. Not to alter the cultural product, that always has to be ring-fenced and protected, but the way you deliver the message can be optimized based on your learnings from your audiences, I think.
As a fair, we do that as well. Very stringent. We have a lot of questionnaires, a lot of audience engagement within the community of people who have visited the fairs, the galleries, the collectors, also surrounding, businesses, and then we collect the data and we have meetings, and then we see what we can do better for the next fair, how we can engage more, how we can attract more people to the fair, which areas we need to target. While technology gives it that aspect, it is that personal relationship and that personal touch that makes you stand out differently. So, it's important still to go to the galleries. It's important still to get rejected, get engaged. That's part of the game.
Yeah. I mean, as a kind of case study, we introduced at the beginning of last year, e-commerce functionality on Artsy. And going back to kind of what we were talking about in terms of having all the information there for the buyer when they're ready to make the decision, it's cut down transaction times for those works from anywhere from about 3 weeks via inquiry of going back and forth, tons of emails, just exchanging the basic information to make a transaction, to around 3 hours through e-commerce. That saves the gallery a ton of time and allows them to get back to working with their artists and the collectors that are walking into their gallery.
Yeah. I think, am I right in saying that obviously the access to art is bigger than it ever was before? More people are engaging and looking at art, considering purchases, but the conversions are less now.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I can say definitively is that based on the auction data that we have at Artnet, if you look at the what's been happening for sales worldwide, the market has been stagnant for about 4 or 5 years. It peaked in like 2014. And that's not a good sign for business. I mean, obviously the auction market is not the gallery market. There's all kinds of information not capturing there. But again, for what should be a growth industry, we're not seeing that growth in some of the traditional places we would expect. So that seems like a negative indicator.
Well, and at a time of incredible economic expansion, that has accrued to people that should be collecting art. Like, people should be buying more. They are much more wealthy than they were 5 years ago. And if they aren't, and it's particularly if transaction volumes are not going up and are in fact declining, there's something really bad to look at in what's going on in our industry.
And I think that's where the public pricing that you guys are introducing is basically building transparency, and it means that drop-off of transactions will hopefully go up, because conversion in our industry is awful. The amount of people that are engaging with work but leaving empty-handed is insane. I think that shows there's something wrong, and we need to change something to bring those conversions up. And I think that's a great way of doing it, is by making the prices public straight away, so you're not leading people on a merry dance.
And making them feel embarrassed. I mean, how many people have walked into a gallery and just had an actively bad experience and then don't want to come back again, or inquired online or anything like that?
Yeah, and it's like you're always, to go back to that idea that you mentioned earlier, Joe, about like the network effect of you can be rude intentionally or unintentionally to one person, and all of a sudden that person has now told everybody who follows them on Instagram, everybody who follows them on Twitter, and you've basically just created a huge roadblock for yourself for all kinds of people, and you didn't even realize it. But I want to go back to something that we were talking about before in terms of this idea of listening to your audience or working off of data or whatever else. Because, Joe, when you talked last year, and Lucia kind of referenced this when we were doing the introduction, you got a lot of pushback from the audience about that idea specifically. And I feel like there was a miscommunication there, because you weren't saying what we do is we just listen to exactly what the audience is telling us and we just do exactly that thing. It's more a matter of, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, because I feel like we're all on the same page about this. But you're saying, like, no, we want to hear how people are thinking about these issues. We want to try to figure out what's relevant to them. And then we're going to take that in and make that a part of the process in how we make decisions, how we decide to engage them. It's not just it goes back to the old Henry Ford thing about how, if I listened to exactly what the audience was telling me, I would have built a faster horse. Like, that's not the point. It's about saying we're going to take the information and give them back something different using all these other data points that we have. So.
Definitely, yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, understand what your audience is doing. Like, don't just ignore what's happening. And we're fortunate in that we got onto, let's say, social media at the right time, and we have now like up to 7 million impressions a week globally on our content. So we have a huge audience constantly engaging with us online, and that provides obviously really interesting and exciting opportunities to get data capture, to understand what the kind of social cultural narrative is around our content and the things that we're posting. And it's, we have an amazing artist we showed at Frieze last year, Helen Beard, whose work is very graphic, it's sexual, and it's about her as a woman taking ownership of sexual imagery, and celebrating sex, celebrating her body, celebrating different body types. And this goes on social media, and the debate that it brings up is incredible. Some people are, this isn't art, this is porn, this shouldn't be seen. Other people obviously backing it, and you get really deep into the integrity of what art is really all about. And for us, like, that's what is so interesting right now, is being able to create this community where you have an exchange of ideas and different topics, different opinions. That's what should be happening. That's what should be happening inside the galleries. That should be what's happening online, and we should be encouraging that debate and stimulating it, because that's where our new ideas come from, and that's our job. And I think by using that data to, I guess what was miscommunicated last year is that we're not using that data to then affect the things that we're showing. If people respond better to a red painting, we're not going to ask our artists to paint more red paintings. We're actually saying that if we understand these cultural values and these opinions and these beliefs, we can use that information to then flip the narrative again and challenge people's ideas. And it becomes our responsibility to constantly recalibrate what our audience is thinking and what our community is saying, in the greater goal of stimulating discussion, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and again, that's the kind of thing that art dealers, or good art dealers, have been trying to do forever, right? Like, to go back to my gallery career briefly, I still remember my boss telling me, like, my job is to figure out what people want before they realize they want it. And now we just have a different element of information out there to help you do that process, and that's not cheating. Like, that's supposed to be the point. Like, you're supposed to give people something that will engage them, excite them, get them interested, and eventually maybe get them to actually buy something.
And I mean, it's I think people have been collecting data, since day one. It's just now it's online and it's more quantifiable. If people are out and about on a Wednesday evening, then you keep your gallery open a bit longer on a Wednesday evening, and you might get some more sales. It's the same collecting the same insights, but now we just have a much richer data set to work with, and that brings us a lot more opportunities.
And it's so much easier to work with the data too. I mean, I think it used to be very arduous to collect all of that and then analyze it in a way. You kind of have to be a quant to do that. But I think we send out monthly analytics to our galleries. They can help them act on Artsy. You look at many of the kind of leading inventory management and CRM platforms. There's really rich kinds of analytics that they're providing, and yet I think I was speaking to one, and they said about 10% of their installed base uses the ROI analysis tool that allows them to see kind of, based on what I invested in the show or this fair or whatever, was this a positive move for my business?
But I think there is a lot of, let's say, big data out there, and we actually don't know what to do with it. I think data is only valuable if you have a strategy to follow afterwards, because, I think that's key. And we need to know how to read the data and then actually take action afterwards, and not just read it and be like, oh, great.
Now I know.
And then,
and then not do anything different.
And sometimes you have limitations as well. You don't have extraordinary, but like I'm talking again from a fair perspective, you don't have extraordinary budgets to engage with what everybody wants from a fair experience. So you just pick and choose sometimes, little things, little changes to enhance experiences. This whole generation is about identity. So it's about really focusing on that person, on that identity.
Now, Claudia, you that point about it's not just about having the data, it's about knowing what to do with it. Is that something that you work with your clients on, like as an art strategy consultant? Is that something that you kind of teach them?
Yeah, if I work with a client, I always start with analysis. I have to look at the location, the people there, dig deep basically to figure out what's the need there. First of all, that's where it starts, because I could do the same model, which is not what I want. I want different scenarios for different locations and different type of people and consumers. So that's why I think quantitative and qualitative data is very important to start with projects at least, and then also add inspiration to it and what's happening in the world also, and find answers to that and positive solutions that have actually a positive impact, and not just something, oh, we're gonna do this because it's been done already like that. And I think for that it's also very important to change from a micro view to a macro view to compare with other industries. And I think in the art world it's also a little bit too much of an insider view. We always look at each other, but we don't compare, not in general, but it's not happening a lot that we compare with other industry, which is super inspiring eventually, and also create something new, because I believe if you bring contradictive things even together, you can create something new. And also going back to the brands, you can see that there is brand collaboration or cross-industry collaborations are very important, because let's say the art world is part of the passion market, of the luxury market. So if we reach out to other brands like watches or whatever, champagne or cars, then we can still approach new audiences. But however, it starts with the analysis, I think, and data eventually.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit here, just because I want to make sure that we really live up to the title of this panel. Let's talk about the money aspect really quickly. So there's this perception out there that one of the issues, this is the last question I will ask, and then we'll pivot into the audience Q&A. Actually, you know what? Since we're that far along, I lost track of time, and I apologize. Let's just end with this. So if each one of you, I'm going to go around, I'll start with you, Cam, but if each one of you could just magically and permanently correct one misconception about millennial buyers, what do you think would be the most helpful for the art market?
Tough one to start. It's about trying to take them seriously. They are seriously interested collectors. If they're willing to take the time to visit these galleries, to come to art fairs, to come to museums, to come to shows, it shows that they're willing to take time off of their busy schedules to do it. And millennials in general have a lot of options to do a lot of different things. So time is of essence, and you just make their time valuable and give them back the experiences that they want to.
Claudia?
I think we simply should learn from them.
Short and sweet. Joe?
I think I said earlier, just that they know their stuff. Basically, they're empowered. They have information. They have knowledge. So I guess it's just being mindful of that and understanding that they're not just these kind of teenagers on their phones taking selfies. They're very, very smart and savvy collectors, and they need to be. And they're also the biggest consumer generation on the planet. So if we all want to make our industry successful in the coming 20, 30 years, we need to engage with them.
I guess that you could continue to operate without them. I mean, I think that if you look and see that these are generations that are going to ask questions that are different than what you've heard before, that doesn't mean that they're unserious. I think you were going to ask about art as investment. They might be asking about an artwork's potential resale value because they really want to buy something that they probably shouldn't or couldn't afford because of the economic realities that they're experiencing. That's an okay thing, especially if it's expressing a passion in the artist's work or the ability to buy something that they really love.
Okay, we are going to move into the audience question period. I believe that we'll have some people going around with microphones. I want to try to get to as many people as possible, so to help me do that, please try to keep your questions short. The fine people up here have had to deal with me moderating them for the past hour or so. If you launch into a monologue, I'm just warning you, I will moderate you too. I don't want to do it, but it will happen. Yes, please.
Hello, what a nice symposium it is. I'm a bit late, I'm sorry. I know some of the participants. I'm Aylin Sekin from Istanbul Bilgi University. I'm a professor of economics, teaching art economics for about 16 years now, and I'm really educating university students to become a collector. Now, my question and my observation is the following. The millennials and the young collectors are more and more interested not to collect, but to share. What do you think about that? The sharing economy, what is the role of sharing economy in the art market? Thank you.
Does anyone want to dive in on that? Claudia?
I just think they mostly want to share experiences together and kind of be that community, and together we experience art and we exchange about art. It's a happening. I think that's the sharing economy.
Let me add what I wanted to say. Actually, they are more interested to rent art. They don't want to pay a lot of money. They want to rent Mercedes. They want to rent beautiful apartments in Monaco. But they don't want to buy art, but they want to leave art for a while. Because they get bored very fast from everything.
I mean, having run the Istanbul Art Fair, I can actually say this is what we were trying to do, is we were trying to engage these collectors to say that, it's about bringing them the right access to art. It's about bringing them the quality of art. And sometimes when you look at luxury as art versus art as an asset class, it's about the educational aspect. And you have to, teach them in a way without patronizing them about the industry. And then that's when they will start collecting art. And we tried to do that, and we did it successfully the 2 years that I was in Istanbul. And we engaged those collectors that you say buy and rent, boats and houses and all that. We engage them within the fair to start buying art on a smaller level. You engage them to buy $10,000 worth of art, $15,000 worth of art. And then, that will establish the collector further.
I think they're also very money conscious, and there is a sharing economy that's coming into play, and people share. You don't have to necessarily own a car these days. You can share it, and but this is a generation that also they struggle to get their first house. They struggle to own things, and I think there's plenty of this generation that buy watches and they buy other investable assets, but they simply don't know enough about the value of buying a painting. Especially if it's an emerging artist, you can get to a certain sort of tipping point. Let's say it's £25,000, where if a young person who's uninitiated, not necessarily knowing what they're doing, for them to purchase that work, they need to know that there's going to be a resale value, because there's other things that they can invest in for that money and know that they can get a return. So that's where the auction houses come into play, because there are real bastion of transparency right now, which is crazy because it's, as we all know, it's like very easily manipulatable. But they need to know what that resale value will be. If they're going to buy something, they need to have some indication of where the pricing is historically in the market and what the future potential is. And they don't have that right now. So I think that's why they're leaning towards other things. They're leaning towards experiences. So until we can like really bring that transparency into play in a meaningful way for this generation, I think they're going to continue to lean on experiences and buy other things and invest in other things.
And greater liquidity too. I mean, I think that it goes hand in hand with being able to more easily, I think if you look at the Real, for example, and people walking into their closet and all of a sudden seeing the opportunity to buy new things because there are things that they could sell in there. Once there's greater liquidity in the market, not to encourage flippers, but to allow people to transition out of things that their taste has evolved beyond. I don't think it has to be renting, which would be a pretty complicated business to do in the art market, I would imagine.
But yeah, there's like recycling.
Exactly.
Like young collectors want to recycle. They don't want to buy something and necessarily own it forever. They're probably buying it with the intention of maybe selling it in a few years' time. So they need to know that there's that out. And lots of young collectors that we work with, let's say 30 to 40 years old, they're buying, and then in 5, 6, 7 years' time, they might want to sell it, and their taste might change, and they might want to invest in something else. And equally, some of the collectors that we deal with come to us with things they bought 10, 15 years ago. They want to sell it to us so they can buy a new artist. And I think that's also, collectors aren't just collecting for the long term anymore, they're also selling. I think that's part of their mindset.
There is also in fintech, the art fractioning, there are startups doing that a lot. Maybe that's a solution.
Well, I would also just add that I think it's also dangerous for us to think too rigidly about the idea of renting art. Like, I'm going to pay a fee to have a painting in my house for a set period of time. Like, going to an exhibition, in a way, is renting art. It's a temporary experience with something. And taking a photo there is renting art, in a sense. And that is how you start that engagement that can then lead down the road to actual purchasing.
But that's why the I don't know if this is working, but that's why the educational aspect is so important. This is what we were doing in Turkey was we were trying, and this is why I think these kind of talks are important, is engaging where you're constantly educating the market about how things are perceived, how, and that's what's important as well. It's not just about, of course, the buying to sell at a more expensive price is very attractive, and maybe that's the way you can lure them in, but trying to motivate to keep a collection, to grow a collection, to think about the artist, to, because you're actually the patron of the artist and then not just the gallery. So, that's what to look at.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for debating for greater transparency, which is always needed. So I actually have 2 questions. My first is for all of you. I would like to know from also the gallery, the fair, and the online perspective, do you think there's a middle ground where you can actually have clients that are boomers and millennials equal parts, or do you think you need more to have a curated program for each of them? Because I understand that some wealthier individuals and who are more classical in their way of buying might not have the same response. So I was wondering, do you think it's something that needs to be curated differently, or if it can be all served in one model? And my second question would be for Claudia. I see that you founded your business regarding real estate related spaces, and I would like to know if you could elaborate a bit about what you do. Thank you.
So from an art fair perspective, it's important to be relevant. So while you're trying to create a showcase for galleries to sell, and the showcase really involves around everything from event production to operations to this, yes, you can have certain areas that are more curated by younger curators, by more relevant curators, talking about sustainability, talking about, things like that to make it more relevant to attract the younger people. But, you don't, as a fair perspective, you don't just want to focus on one group. We have to focus on the broader spectrum, but then, we can have little subgroups where we could get the attention from the, let's say, millennials, from the Zs, from the, baby boomers, etc.
I think it's, one of the amazing things about art is that it brings people together across generations and cultural divides. And so I don't think you have to have a different artistic program to hit different audiences. What you might need to do is segment your audience and talk to those different groups of people differently. I think you even see some of the major galleries doing that already, having much older kind of partners who are dealing with their very established clients and much younger people from our generation leading their online initiatives. We certainly do that with different aspects of our audience, talking to one group in one way and another in another way that'll appeal to them more. And, a millennial might want a much more accessible kind of presentation of information. A boomer might need a little bit more kind of intellectual approach.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's basically kind of tailoring your messaging to different audiences. Like we have every single month, or for every show, we'll have a series of emerging musicians who will come in and respond to the themes of the exhibition, and that tends to pull in a much younger crowd. And let's say the boomer generation might not be interested in that type of experience, but then we have other more intellectual, more in-depth events, whether they're panel discussions or something of that nature, where you kind of get a deeper connection with an older generation. There's definitely ways of tailoring your experiences and your offerings based on who you're speaking to, and obviously you can use data to help you do that in a digital way too. But in terms of the cultural product, in terms of the works you're selling and your programming, generally new, exciting, emerging artists, and any artist really is appreciated by an older generation and the younger generation. So the actual programming, I think, remains the same. It's just how you activate different experiences around that that you can tailor and change.
Claudia?
I may just answer my question, but should I, or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so my part on real estate is actually, it's very similar to K11. So I work with real estate developers that mostly do mixed-use developments. That means there are different modules inside. It can be health, it can be education, hotel, convention, whatever. And art brings in a certain... it brings in a big add-on, actually, because art has also become part of a lifestyle, and people just get this within a whole platform. And I think, especially with retail, that's what a lot of real estate developers also do. The whole digitalization has actually shifted the retail consumer, where he starts to gather information online, and he wants to explore and experience it offline and then buy the product online again. And I think with that, it means that the retail gets more into showrooms actually than sales places, whereas art is also a lot about experience and a showroom and, bringing people in. And it's another thing, as I mentioned before, this passion and luxury market is along the same line, and a art hub, I call it, within a large-scale development is, for me, just an extension of the line, and attracts a lot of footfall, and makes use of it creates a narrative. It's used for PR and communication. So it of course it approaches the 99 people and not only the 1%. Yeah.
We have somebody way in the back. Okay, we'll get to you next. Promise.
Thank you, everyone. It was dense and really interesting. I was wondering if you could speak to some patterns you might have noticed of millennial collectors in the primary versus secondary market. Joe, you talk a lot of, obviously, emerging artists, and maybe for those younger collectors to have the opportunity to visit a living artist studio and all these things. But can you talk a bit about how they respond to dead artists, basically, also?
Yeah, I think, obviously the secondary market is much more investment motivated, so those conversations tend to be much less about their passion, actually, and much more about, they see it as an investment. And it's usually a much longer term investment, unless you're dealing with flippers who you can usually spot straight away. But they are very money conscious, and if they're going to spend £1 million upwards on a painting on the secondary market, they want to know. First of all, they will have done their research. They will have gone around the galleries. They will have gone on to Artsy. They would have looked at Artnet and seen all the results. So they're empowered with information, and their mentality is very investment focused. Is very much focused on numbers, and so we have that aspect to our business. We prefer to focus on the development of younger artists and bring them through into mid-career, but it's an important thing. Very different mentality when you're dealing with I'm not sure. I don't think there's much of a difference when it comes to the older clients that buy on the secondary market versus younger clients. I think it's a similar mentality, but it's very much one of investment. I don't know if you guys have anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the secondary market, just from both from a budget perspective and from scale, they can adapt to new generation in a much more quick way. And as we were kind of touching on before, maybe millennial collectors are less compromising in deciding, oh, I really want this artist. It's not available on the primary. Okay, I'll find something else. But on the other hand, the primary market is so important to foster the artists that are coming up. So I think that's where we really see ourselves as coming in and trying to bridge that, at least the digital divide that a secondary market outfit or a major gallery might put out there that might be helping them develop millennial collectors. And for a smaller gallery, that might not be something that they have the ability to invest in.
And I think there's also definitely a split between, a lot of the times the clients will come to us for our primary program, and then the conversation will develop and it will turn into a secondary interest. So there's also not necessarily a distinction. A lot of them are very passionate about collecting emerging artists, but then also have the funds, let's say, to invest at a higher level. And a lot of the time they will come from families who have a tradition of collecting too.
All right, all the way in the back. Oh.
Hello, everyone.
Okay.
Yuli is my name. I'm a curator and art historian based in Berlin. And my question is regarding, you spoke a lot about educating millennials, right? You spoke a lot about building a new community of collectors. So what we are experiencing in Berlin right now is that we have, on one hand, a lot of startup entrepreneurs, and they are looking for a new they are looking for a new thing. They are looking to invest in art. They are interested in it. But how can we educate them about the art, about the sculptures, painting, if they are used to paying 1 second attention on Instagram? They want to have experience. They want to have digital art without giving them Burning Man experience. How can we teach them that sculpture installation performance is worth engaging with? Because right now we have the artistic community that is somehow existing in its own art bubble, but we need to engage with the startup community. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere. So how do you educate this kind of people, this kind of millennials with huge assets, and somehow they want to participate, but they want to pay 2,000 euro and to sell a work of art in 2 years for 20,000 euro, what they did with their startups? So what can we do?
I really think it's about us reaching across the aisle and not kind of expecting them to come in. Even if you look at artists like Hank Willis Thomas and Studio Drift that have done amazing artworks out of Burning Man, that's brought in a whole new group of collectors that might not have otherwise ever heard of Pace or Jack Shaman. And if we find ways to get people across the threshold, I think there's a lot of art out there that can appeal to that community. One thing that I hear a lot is that they're less excited about some of the kind of vibe and traditional structures of the art world. I was just in San Francisco for the fairs out there, and I think you hear that a lot of the major collectors out there might not, they might have bought from the galleries that are showing at the fairs, but they don't really want to go into what they see as a kind of pretentious art fair experience and have to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, and I think you are dealing with a generation who have much shorter attention spans. That's just the way it is. But I think you use those platforms where they're spending their time to not to kind of give them everything. You use it as a hook to get them into engaging with you and your experiences that you put on in the gallery. And you have to kind of arc what you're providing, so you can provide a quick instant gratification, let's say on Instagram or your social media, which will then allow them to click through to a website, which will allow them to book a ticket to a much deeper, more intellectual experience in the gallery, which they can then share with their audience again, and the kind of the cycle continues and repeats like that.
So to contradict a little bit what Alex said, because I come from the fair background, actually, a fair is that tool, that showcase a perfect showcase for a millennial, because you have the booths and you have up to 50 and 140 of them. So it gives them a quick insight into the artists that they like. They can engage with the gallery, then they get feedback from the gallery. They can keep in touch with the gallery afterwards. They happen to be in the city for a conference, and they can keep the relationship going. And this is what we provide as a fair perspective is we want to engage them, we want to hook them in, and then keep the relationships with the galleries going. So we're that platform to do that for them.
Okay, now all the way in the back, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask about, or introduce rather, the geographical aspect of this. Because when you talk about young money and you say some of them are come from collector parents, and I just, there is a division between, let's say, the Western world where art institutions have been very present and more in the kind of everyday aspect of the millennials' life. But then you also have other kind of rising geographies. Since we talked about Turkey in the last biennial in September, half of the millennials were going to the new Arter space opening, and the other half was flying to Eskişehir to like a new amazing museum that opened. So I just wanted to know if you make some distinctions, between what's happening in, let's say, Eastern Europe, Turkey, South America, because I kind of just feel a bit that this was a Western aspect, or maybe, or how you would differentiate the young money and the millennials in different parts of the world, because I don't think they are all the same. That's just my question about a geographical aspect of it.
No, and I think that brings up a really important point. Like, obviously, by its nature, if we're trying to talk about a whole group of people like millennials, or talk about Asian collectors, whatever, like, these are huge groups of people that have all kinds of different nuances involved in them, and I think it's important to try to find those distinctions. I have more that I could say about that, but for the time being, I mean, Claudia, obviously you were talking about Hong Kong and K11 and all those kinds of things, and Cam, you've been talking about Turkey. So I don't know. I mean, Alex, like, do you see any kind of when you're parsing data for younger collectors? I mean, do the geographic trends show you anything different?
By and large, they remain fairly true generation by generation. I work in our China business as well, and one thing that we do see there is that the collectors are about 10 years younger in their journey at any point in time. So that's something that's maybe slightly different. But I do really think that a lot of the core access to information component is really a key driver there. We see that, particularly for those collectors who are in geographies that might not have as robust of a contemporary art infrastructure as New York, London, Barcelona, anywhere, that having that immediate access to information is that much more important. And what's really cool about that, and what we see with our collectors, is then they are sometimes traveling to those places and meeting the gallerists, meeting with the artists. But by and large, a lot of the trends remain true.
Okay, one more question then. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the insights, valuable insights on the industry. This is kind of a boring question in a way, but I would like to know what's the impact on the tax side of young money, For example, a physical gallery being in a certain country, or a gallery that's online and doesn't have like an actual physical store or front. So what's the tax side for a collector on this, and what's your opinion about this particular point?
Well, Joe, right before we came on the panel, you were talking about the idea of the fact that you guys only have one physical location.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not expanding in other senses, so just in terms of overhead and all that kind of stuff. So maybe you can...
Yeah, I think from a tax point of view, from a collector, I mean, there's certain things that you can do as a collector to protect your assets. If you have a great collection, there's structures you can set up to protect it and make it more tax efficient for you. In terms of how galleries operate and how that affects, to your point, I mean, we have our central gallery in Mayfair in London, and we've had lots of opportunities to open up overseas in different locations. But actually, if you can make your online community really strong, if you have 7 million people engaging with you a week, and a lot of those people are big curators and collectors from all over the world, lots of different cultures, and different cultures is a really important thing. Everyone that you deal with from different cultures has a different kind of way of approaching you and have different values and belief systems, so you have to obviously be sensitive to that. But if you can build a really strong online global community, which is what we've done over the last couple of years, the idea of taking on big new fixed costs by opening up another space elsewhere becomes quite a tricky kind of prospect. It's almost, it'd be nice to have 10 galleries around the world for us, but actually if we can spend a tenth of that money and create amazing experiences and keep building our audience globally, that almost has more value for us at the moment than taking on huge fixed costs and open up galleries overseas. I think it's going back to the experience point, you can create experiences without having huge fixed costs of other galleries. You can have pop-up spaces. Last year we did a pop-up in Frieze LA. Lots of big galleries are also doing pop-ups in conjunction with big fairs, where you know the audiences are going to be. And then obviously other artists and galleries are collaborating with other brands, activating art and exhibitions in different ways. So there's much more cost-effective ways of reaching new audiences and having a physical presence other than kind of building other galleries, I think. And from a tax perspective, it's something you've got to deal with, tax, unfortunately. But
thank you.
All right. I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much for listening to us. And